Hi everyone, a bit of a different video for me today. Thought I would add something a little bit new to my channel beyond our garden quilt project. Now, I have been feeling recently that I wanted to do a little bit more just pure slow stitch, a little bit more experimentation, just for a bit of fun and to keep developing my skills and just as a little bit of therapeutic textile art, I suppose. And I was thinking about what people do when they draw or sketch or paint, and most artists tend to have sketchbooks, and I do have a sketchbook where I do a lot of my planning, but I wanted to create something of a sketchbook for stitching. So I was looking on Amazon for something like a fabric book, and I stumbled across this little beauty. It's an indigo sketchbook by Artway. I will try and find this on Amazon again and link it in the description below. It's got this beautiful watercolour paper inside it, and it's so textured and lovely. It's almost got a handmade feel to it, and I thought this might be really great for storing some slow stitch pieces. I really like how thick the paper is and how robust it is, and I think it will hold up really well. You can see it's got a lot of pages. I really liked the fact that this has got a band to close it with, because I think if I add lots of stitch pieces in here, it is going to get really chunky. I might have to take a few of the pages out further down the line, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Now, I have to be honest, I don't enjoy stitching on paper. What I was hoping I could do is some stitch work on fabrics that I can just attach into this book, either with glue, I don't really like glue either, or just with a couple of stitches to hold it in place. So rather than just stitching directly onto the paper, I'm going to play around on fabric and then attach it into the book. And I thought it might be interesting every now and again to make a video experimenting with some textile art and growing this booklet sort of on my channel on camera so that you can see some of the ways that I work. So this is a 4.5 inch by 6 inch sketchbook, so it's a roughly postcard size. I think it's a nice size for a small piece of textile art. In centimetres, it is about 15 by 11-ish. So it's just a really cute size. It's not too onerous. It'll be a nice size to create some pieces of textile art. So that's the book. I'm going to keep it to one side for the time being, and we'll add our little piece at the end. So that's my plan anyway, and I thought we could do something a little bit different today, because the fact that I'm working on paper reminded me that I've got quite a stash of paper in my cupboard and I don't use it very often. I don't really like mess and I don't like glue, and I find paper very temperamental because it tears. But I did get this wrapping paper. I've had it for about 4 years because I can't bring myself to throw it away. I absolutely love everything about this paper. I love the colours, I love the gold foil, I love the botanical designs, I love how folksy it is, and I've kept it because I found it quite an inspirational design, and I thought maybe I can do something with this at some point in the future. And so I've been having a look on YouTube and doing a little bit of research, and I've come across a technique that might allow me to stitch on this without it feeling like paper. Now, my problem with stitching on paper is that, as some of you may know, I have arthritis and my hand strength is very poor. One of the reasons that I sew is to keep my hands nice and mobile, keep flexibility in my hand joints, and to develop a little bit of hand strength. And I find stitching on paper just really quite difficult, really painful, and because of that it's not a process I enjoy. But I've come across something called MOMIGAMI, which is a technique where we turn paper into something more like a fabric. Now this is a Japanese technique and it involves paper and just some store cupboard oil. So I've got some pure coconut oil. This is an odourless oil, and although I'm using this, you could use any oil from your kitchen cupboard. So if you've got vegetable oil or light coloured olive oil, that would work fine. Sunflower oil, pretty much anything I think would work. And all we do is just pick up some of the oil. I'm only going to use this tub of oil for craft projects, by the way, so don't worry that I'm going straight in. And I'm going to rub it onto my hands. I'm hoping that my hands are going to get a nice sort of coconut oil treatment while I'm doing this. And so you can see I've got oil spread all over my hands, and all we're going to do is work that into the paper. Now, momigami means kneaded paper in Japanese, and so what we are going to try and do is just work oil into the fibres of the paper so that its texture changes completely. And we're going to be quite gentle at the beginning because we don't want to tear our paper too much, but I'm just going to load up my hands with oil and literally just knead the paper, screw it up into a ball and keep working it so that the oil penetrates beneath the surface. Now, I'm experimenting with this paper. I do have doubts about it because it does have a bit of a sheen. You can see that my hands are far less shiny now, and that's because the oil that was on them has now been soaked into the paper. And so I'm just going to go back, get some more oil, load up my hands again and repeat the process. And what we want to see is, particularly on the back of the paper, the colour is going to change as it takes on the oil. So again, I'm just unscrewing it, and you should be able to see that there are some darker areas on this now where the oil has worked into the surface. Now, my research has suggested that this process should take about 5 minutes. So hopefully you can see there's some darker grey areas there. Basically, whenever we crumple the paper, we are breaking the structure, breaking the fibres of the paper and allowing that oil to work its way into the sort of fabric of the paper. So again, loading up my hands with oil. Laying my hands on it there just to let some of the oil start soaking in straight away. And I'm just going to keep repeating this process. So loading up with oil, scrunching down the paper and squeezing the oil into the fibres of the paper until it becomes more flexible. Spreading it back out again, and then just going back for some more. So I've sped up this process. I actually spent about 10 minutes on this in total, and I think it took a little bit longer because I was working with a glossier paper, and so it took a while for the oil to penetrate. Just so that you know what to expect in the process, there's lots of paper fibres all over the table. I'm spreading it out a little bit more there. You can see that the texture has changed completely already. So we've got a much bouncier substance. It does tear at this stage if you pull it really hard, but it's gone from that smooth, sort of glossy, very crunchy texture to a much softer, bouncier, more pliable texture. So went back in with some oil. You can see the colours are breaking down a little bit, so it's far less bright than it was. And if I bring back in the original, you might be able to tell that the paper has actually shrunk as well. So my recommendation is that you don't cut your paper to size before you put it through this process, because it is going to reduce in size. It's going to get a lot paler, a lot more sort of dull in colour. You're going to tone it right down, really. So I'm back in again with some more, and hopefully you can see the back of that paper has completely changed colour. It's gone from a very bright white to a more translucent greyish tone. So I'm just doing my last few scrunchies. You can see the texture there is more like a cloth now than it is like paper. It did take quite a while, and I have never done this before, so I'm doing this for the first time on camera, so I had really no idea what to expect at all. I was just giving it a bit of a whirl. So I think I went for about 10 minutes in total, as I say, and you can see how much that paper has shrunk. Now, there are some tears in it, and just full disclosure, some of those were me seeing how robust the paper was, and some of it was me just the paper just breaking down as I was needing it. So I may have gone a little bit too long on this. So I'm happy enough with that texture now, and I've bought in some packing paper because what I want to do is draw out some of the excess oil that's in the paper. Some tutorials that I watched suggested to do this, others didn't suggest this at all, but because I'm working with fabric as well, I didn't want the oil to be soaking into my fabric and leaving marks or stains, so I thought I'd just try it, see what happened. Now if you use brown paper, you would be able to see this a lot more clearly. I was hoping that you'd be able to see some of the oil drawing out, but because I used a white paper, it wasn't very visible. But I'm just taking my iron over the surface there. I've trapped my MOMIGAMI paper in between two layers of my packing paper, and I'm just taking my iron over the top, pressing it so that the paper draws out some oil and soaks it up, and it's also going to flatten out that MOMIGAMI paper a little bit more as well, just to make it a little bit more workable. So I experimented with a few different papers. This one was probably the most successful. This was just a wrapping paper, but it was not glossy. It was just quite a robust, thick paper to start with no foil or gloss on it, just a print, and it held its colour really well. I did struggle to avoid tears completely, but you can see when I'm pulling at it, it's far more bouncy and it flows a little bit more like paper as well. You can see the paper just sort of draping in a way that it wouldn't as paper. So it's got a bit of bounce to it. It seems a little bit more resilient, and there you go, you can see it's like a thick fabric, almost like a calico, this one. So it's got that sort of weight to it and a lovely kind of drape. So that one worked really well. So I would recommend a sort of good quality wrapping paper. Now this one feels a little bit like moleskin. This is a scrapbook paper that I tried, and it was quite difficult to get it going to start off with. And an unusual thing happened with this one. The layers of the paper started coming apart. So you can see me here just peeling those two layers apart, and that leaves me with a kind of velvety feeling surface paper with a pattern on it, and then this sort of white underlayer that has got a similar texture but looks completely different, obviously. And this one was really interesting. So this is tissue paper, and you can see me pulling at it there a little bit. It's got some bounce, it's got a lovely drape. It feels a little bit like silk, this one. And one of the things that I did really enjoy in my experimenting was seeing how different the texture of different papers became when I took it through this MOMIGAMI process. They feel, all four of these papers felt completely different. Now I am going to put some slow stitching together. I've got a rectangle of backing fabric that I've cut to fit just inside my book, and this is mostly my MOMIGAMI papers. I have got a few bits of fabric down here I've got a metallic here, and I've got another bit of fabric up here as well. But mostly I've put in place my MOMIGAMI papers, and it does tear still. Another thing that I really liked about it was that you can get a decal edge on it in a way that you can't with fabric. So it doesn't fray, obviously, but you can get those really nice torn edges. And I'm not going to do all of this piece on camera, but I just wanted you to see it being stitched. So I'm stitching through tissue paper here, essentially, and you can tell already if I was just stitching through tissue, this would be tearing every time I pulled a needle through it. I don't believe that tissue would be able to take thread passing through it. This is a size 8 pearl cotton as well, so it's a chunky thread, and you can see that that thread is passing through the tissue paper as if it was fabric. There's no resistance whatsoever. It felt just like sewing through fabric. There was no difficulty whatsoever. So it didn't feel like I was having to pop the needle through the paper. There was no need to pre-punch the paper to get the needle to go through it. I was able to sew this complete piece with all the different papers that I'd used as if it was just purely fabric. And I'm hoping you can see as the panel's moving there, the paper is behaving as if it was fabric. It's folding, it's draping, it's moving along with the backing fabric. There's no creasing or crumpling, it's just sewing like a dream. So I was really impressed with the way that this process completely changed the paper really and made it workable for me. It does open up to me a whole stash of paper that I've got in my cupboard that I never use because I find it difficult to stitch through, and a whole other range of patterns and textures and edges that I've never really been able to make use of in sewing because I find stitching through paper so difficult. So I'm just going backwards and forwards with some running stitches here and just enjoying the process really. So the pros of MOMIGAMI is that it can turn your paper into something that is comfortably stitchable if you don't have a great deal of hand strength. It allows you to get torn edges, decal edges. It allows you to make use of a whole other range of resources. Paper is obviously significantly cheaper than fabric, and so it could actually open up stitching to you if you can't afford to develop a stash of different fabrics. I think it brings in another texture into your work. So I think if you are somebody like me who really enjoys different textures when you're sewing, then this is a great technique to use. It's really inexpensive. You can use stuff that's just lying around your house. You could obviously print your own papers and designs. It makes printables accessible for you to use in your sewing. So there are loads and loads of pros to this technique. The downside, I would say, is that it's quite messy. I'm not somebody that enjoys the sensation of stuff on my hands, and I don't really like mess. So as long as you're happy to get your hands very oily and a little bit grubby, this one's for you. But if you don't like that, that's going to be difficult. Another downside is that I found it really difficult to not tear the paper, and it does shrink your paper, so you have less at the end than you had to start off with. But really, I think that's the only downsides I can see. So I've got some threads that match the colours of my papers. I found a few buttons, and I'm just going to experiment off camera and fill in the rest of the stitching on this MOMIGAMI piece. So I finished off my panel and I've attached it to my book, and this is the piece that I came up with. And you can see I've got my stamps in there. I thought because it was paper we could use some papercraft techniques. I've done some colonial knots and French knots, and I've added in some buttons, put in a little bit of feather stitch over on the other side, but mostly it's just running stitch, and there's some cross stitches down there at the bottom. And I found this just really enjoyable, even though it's just a fairly simple slow stitch piece. It felt very new because I was using a new technique, and it was just a really enjoyable process. I hope you found that inspiring, and I hope you've got some ideas for your own textile art. That's it for today. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you soon in another video. Bye!